Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Carlos. Grateful to be here with all of you. Carlos did, I think, a really great job of laying out the many ways in which we hope as an administration to be a partner with all of you. And we just want to double click on some of those themes, see if we can open up a few additional areas to team up and partner. The first is on sustainable aviation fuels. We have, as many of you know, forthcoming guidance on sustainable aviation fuels that hopefully in the United States will unlock a significant amount of investment going forward. In the scheme of a number of tax credits that run 10 years or longer, the SAF credit does not. And so one of the things I think we want to be in partnership with industry on is how we show and build that momentum and make the investment case to the taxpayer, essentially, that this is a good investment in our shared energy security and in terms of invigorating a new and important industry across the United States. A second place where I think we are in partnership is in the arena of hydrogen-based fuels. In the coming weeks, you'll see from us a proposed rule that will lay out the guideposts for how, with high integrity, we move forward in unleashing the power, in particular, of fuels that are derived by flowing clean electrons through molecules of water, hydrogen to the one side, oxygen to the other. And I think that is going to really put the onus on not just the producers of the hydrogen, those folks aren't here, but the users of that fuel to demand high environmental integrity. I think this is an industry that will face real questions around social license right out of the gate. There will be questions about transparency, about analysis. We will try to answer them as the government and the responsibilities that we have. But I think we will need to be in partnership with all of you as we achieve liftoff on this new and critical technology. You know, one of the themes of the day is around just transition. And I think this panel is really illustrative of what it looks like to engage meaningfully in that conversation. I think rightfully across this COP, people are scrutinizing decarbonization plans and evaluating them for what they might mean for workers and the communities and families that they support. In the United States, that's been a robust dialogue in the transportation sector. Our colleagues at General Motors just recently have engaged with our auto workers to deliver a historic agreement that not only sets the course along the pace that GM had announced just a few years ago, accelerating path to an all-electric future, but also does it in a way where workers see job security and increasing economic security as well. That's got to be a critical part of how we do this transition. But it's not just about the economics of the transition. I think it's also about building the skills pipeline into the workforce itself. I went with Scott Kirby to United's Houston operations, where they have incredible partnerships, pulling people through apprenticeships and into the workforce. Such an important way to build pipelines into careers. You know, we've all gone through in the last few years the experience of supply chain vulnerability. For a long time, we were on a precipitous decline in the trajectory of lithium-ion batteries, the costs associated with them. And then we hit this hiccup The hiccup was a supply chain induced one. We're now finally back on a trajectory of decline. But I think in the same way we are hard-headed about planning around supply chain today, having learned the lessons of the pandemic and of disinvestment in supply chains, we have to be hard-headed about our human capital needs going forward. One of the things that's really, I think, interesting in terms of paradigm for the transportation conversation today, and I think Kara probably thinks about this all the time, is this inescapable nature of having to interact with a system rather than with technologies. Maybe in the transportation conversation 15, 20 years ago, you could be thinking about, I want to be buying vehicles, maybe as a commercial fleet operator, that are X efficiency higher than the vehicles I had in my previous fleet. That is a technology conversation. It doesn't really beg you to rethink the system in which that technology is deployed. Today, large commercial operators have to think through that system equation, and that's very challenging, and it can create real, I think, impediments to achieving speed and scale on this decarbonization trajectory. But we want to be your partner in that. Just a couple of weeks ago at the White House, we brought together folks who think only about the grid and folks who only think about heavy-duty vehicles. And we forced them to talk to one another, because without that exchange, and it's, again, an exchange that you all can put together through the power of your buying, we're not going to make the progress at the speed we need to. It's not just about the sort of hard technology cost curve that we need to travel. It's that balance of systems as well. And without that foresight on balance of systems, it will be the barrier to scale and speed. You see that with, I think, Maersk as well, thinking through the entire system that needs to be brought to bear on the decarbonization of marine fleets around the world. The notion that we can translate the wind that blows across West Texas into fuels that can be put into ships that will sail around the world with zero or low emissions, without thinking through the pipeline infrastructure, without thinking through the port infrastructure, how are you going to pressurize stuff, who are the workers that you need along that entire value chain, it's just not that simple. It's not as simple as docking up to stuff that's already been there. So to Carol's point, maybe to bring it home, we have really, I think, the wind at our sails, wind at our backs, filling our sails, moving us forward in so many ways in the United States, right? We've got the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure law. We've got standard setting where we've got really good muscle memory working with the private sector in transportation, light duty, heavy duty, and increasingly in aviation and marine as well. But we're hitting the really hard part of the transformation. And if the United States as a jurisdiction can, I think, work through implementation and the systems challenges and the supply chain challenges as a gazelle, I think that de-risks the scale up of the technology worldwide. We will bring down not just the hard costs of the tech, but the balance of systems costs as well. And if we do it with a playbook that keeps an eye on the prize, the people we serve. And we're not just the folks that serve the people, right? That's obvious. But all of you are brands. People look to you, and your reputation ebbs and flows in terms of how you treat your people, your customers, or your workers. If we build those playbooks, the transition will be durable. We've seen what it looks like to have people wearing yellow jackets stalling progress in the transportation sector. And as the Biden administration, we're more excited to have people wearing hard hats, building the transition on the inside. So very grateful for this conversation, for the leadership of this group. To Carol's, I think, encouragement, it's time to get deep in the details of implementation and get on the road. Thanks so much.
There's a mic shortage, okay, and I won't move because I'll go flying. It was great. Thank you, Ollie, and thank you, Carlos, for kicking us off, I think, with some very thought-provoking and welcome. Thank you. Why don't we, so we can drown them out, we're going to start with a rapid-fire question. I just go down the row. What has been your biggest success in transportation decarbonization in the last year? You know, what has your company done? What are you the proudest of in the last year? Yep.
Great.
Kara?
Thanks. Well, that was a great way to kick it off, and I think that there are so many exciting things that we've had the opportunity to work on at Amazon. One is we're heavily focused on electrification of our last mile fleet. So when we announced our commitment to be net zero by 2040, we ordered 100,000 electric delivery vans, and we've been hard at work at putting those on the road around the world and working with multiple different, electric delivery van manufacturers. And so that's been huge. And then we also are, working on the hydrogen economy, and we have pit equipment that we have been using hydrogen for and working on deployment of that. And so I think it's just been, looking across all of the different modalities that we work in, whether it's maritime and working with Maersk and thinking about how do we send those demand signals through our different coalitions that we're involved in, like ZEMBA that was mentioned, the Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance, or on sustainable aviation fuels, thinking about sending those demand signals and working through the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, SABA. We are thinking about how do we work across sectors and work together, the demand signals that Amazon can bring, and think about really, one, addressing the fact that the bringing things to cost parity. So what can we do to send the demand signals and say we need these products and services to come to cost parity? There is a demand for them because that helps you send those signals, to bring other companies into the climate pledge because that brings industry along. And then three, learning more about, as was mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act and what's available through the Infrastructure Act, and say, be a part of the things like the hydrogen hubs and send signals there as well. So it's kind of public sector, private sector, government, and pulling all of those levers. And it's been really, really exciting, actually, to see all of the momentum come together. So we're working across all of that. We also have a Climate Pledge Fund that we're excited about. So that's a $2 billion fund that we launched, and we've been making investments out of that fund. We've made 23 so far, so we're investing in early stage technologies as well. It's kind of more in the moonshot level, and some of those will take off. But those are also things like electrolyzers, right, which will begin to create supply to the green hydrogen economy. So we're kind of working at every single level, whether it's things that have not yet taken off that we hope will, or things that we want to see scale up that we're going to need, or investments that we're making to kind of drive those demand signals. So we're trying to send signals all throughout the whole life cycle there, and work throughout industry. But it's been a really exciting time, I think, as is mentioned, because we're not just anymore making pledges and saying this is what we will do. We're very actively involved, I think, with everyone here and throughout all of these industries, concrete, steel, aviation, maritime, and on the road to really deploy and get moving. So,
well, that's, I think, what makes this COP so exciting, as I said, is that we're not talking about what we might do. We're talking about how we're going to do it. And so thank you. Christian, your favorite decarbonization story of the year.
Thanks.
so much.
That's a hard act to follow. But I think case in point, before I start taking the perspective of my own company, I actually would like to thank Amazon, our hosts here, not just for hosting the event, but I actually think for the leadership that you're showing here. There's a lot of talk about what we should be doing, and a lot of less action. And I think there are very few companies that displays the leadership of Amazon, putting your full capabilities, your your influence and your money where your mouth is. I think if we had more of that, we would be far more progressed. So I think we should actually start with a round of applause for our hosts. How about that?
Yes.
If I then turn to my world, which is a lot about containers, I think the year has actually been, I think in general, it's been a tough year with wars and high interest rates and, you know, with all kinds of things. I'm actually quite hopeful over the progress that we have seen. If I start on the customer side, because I guess that's why we are here, leaders such as Amazon, but also more companies are really stepping up, and we are actually seeing an increased, we have a green product in shipping, where we are seeing continued strong growth, which is very, very encouraging. And we are also now beginning to deploy products on the land side, which is also picking up momentum. So I think that's super important, because without, I mean, we're here to serve our customers, and if there is no interest for a green product, I mean, we can't be doing it. I think then on sort of the business side, I think exactly to your point, we are in execution mode. It's not about making PowerPoints and pledges and, you know, we're doing stuff. We had this summer the name giving of our first green container ship, Laura Maersk, by Ursula von der Leyen. And that ship is now in operation in Northern Europe, running on green methanol. So it's happening. We have another 8 coming next year. We 2 weeks ago secured the fuel for those ships on a 10-year basis, starting from 2026. So we actually have a 10-year offtake agreement with Goldwind, Chinese developer. So now we don't only have the vessels, we can actually fuel them with the real stuff. So very encouraging, and we are seeing this green fuel market really materializing. So and we have on the land side in the US, we now have 90. So that may not sound as much when you listen to your fleet, but these are like Class 8 heavy-duty tractors that can actually haul a 40-foot container. So again, doing stuff, learning about how to do this. And then finally, I would say on the regulatory side, we have actually seen some very positive developments, because as much as we are depending on the leadership of Amazon and similar companies, clearly not all companies are going to be willing to pay. And we need to get to cost parity, and that's how this thing is going to move really fast. So what we have seen in the shipping part of our business is that we are regulated under the United Nations, so the so-called International Maritime Organization, IMO. There is a framework now that can actually make for an extremely effective transition, including specific measures for percentages of green fuels in specific years, including a pricing mechanism on emissions. And what we are doing in our industry is actually, which is actually unprecedented, we are actually joining forces. So instead of competing the hell out of each other as we normally do, on this particular topic, we have decided that we shouldn't be competing, we should actually be working together. And actually on Friday, some of you may have seen, there was actually an announcement from 5 CEOs who don't normally have that many cozy hours together. But they actually got together and said that we will stand united to put pressure on the political system to get to the high end of the ambition level, and very importantly, to get through this pricing mechanism. And we are going to develop a concrete suggestion that we'll do as an industry. I think we'll call it a green balance fee, which, if successful, will basically level the playing field. And then this is going to take off with a speed that, I think will be quite encouraging. So, but of course, you know, still a lot of work to be done, and politics are politics, so not in our control. So in a year's time, I might either be having a really big smile or not so much. I'm actually quite optimistic that we can get this job done. So
exciting.
So quite a good year.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Optimism is good. Exactly. Lauren.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be here, and thank you, Amazon, for the invitation to talk about this really critical issue. You know, in aviation, 98% of the greenhouse gas emissions across the United's inventory is from the use of aviation fuels. So why do you hear so much about sustainable aviation fuels as the alternative to conventional? It's our elephant in the room. So if you talk about climate leadership, you must talk about replacing or reducing the fuel on our jets. We have had a number of really important milestones over the last year, really, frankly, around our commitment to climate leadership. First and foremost, I will mention that, like others across the industry, we made a commitment to net zero, but our commitment started and maintains without the use of carbon offsets. And the reason that we made that pledge is because we recognized early on, if we were going to commit to climate leadership, we actually need to commit to action within our sector. And so our pledge to realize our ambition around net zero without relying on traditional carbon offsets, was really us saying we must focus, we must use all of our resources, our attention to drive the solutions within sector. In the last year alone, we've had a number of milestones that have really helped implement and execute against our transition strategy. And it's really, really just so amazing to hear the conversation turn to action instead of net new pledges and goals and objectives that everyone continues to ask for. Because really, if we're not putting the muscle behind the shift that needs to happen, nothing's going to change. So a couple of very quick examples. Earlier this year, United launched the Sustainable Flight Fund under our venture capacity. This is really an ability for us to invest in the early stage startup technologies around sustainable aviation fuels. We weren't seeing the kind of action we needed in the market around supporting these early stage startups. And so we took our dollars, pulled them with peer investors across the industry. Today we've got about 13 investors across the value chain that have also put their dollars in with United. Notable, there are 3 other commercial airlines in our fund. And so this is an example of where United is stepping forward and saying, on behalf of the industry, as an operator that understands those technologies are going to work and scale over time, come join us. Because this is not about United alone, this is about transitioning a hard-to-abate industry. In the last year, we've also announced apprenticeship programs. We talk a lot about a just transition and actually pulling through the communities and the people that fly our aircraft and those that should be flying our aircraft as we talk about a sustainable future. And so whether it's for pilot training, whether it's for digital technology specialists or for mechanics, we now have the ability to bring in unionized jobs that help support our climate transition to low carbon flying, which is really quite remarkable. So those are just 2 examples, Carol, that we're taking our pledge and turning it into action in ways that can benefit not just the climate, but also the communities we serve and provide much more of a holistic approach to solving.
Thank you. You know, I think one of the and Ollie mentioned this, the commitments of the president and the Biden administration has been this, you know, just and equitable transition. I know all of you are thinking about it, and I think it's exciting to really work with communities, to think about what communities want. I know from my experience of being a regulator, if you wait to do that on the back end, it never goes well. So the idea that people are doing it on the front end, so I applaud all of you for that. And Christian, thank you for joining us. We did do a round of introductions at the beginning, so you've been introduced.
My apologies.
No
As
worries.
those who have been here a few days, at least, the logistics are never simple. So.
Yes, just the logistics of moving around a large site.
Exactly, and off-sites and everything else. So,
Yes.
so thank you, and my apologies for being late. But and thanks for having us here today. It's always tough to go last to come up with something new to say, but I think it really reinforces how, even though we are all working in different industries, how similar the challenges are and how we can continue to collaborate on solutions regardless of where we're starting from. And again, just to reinforce, I think what's exciting is to see that we're getting beyond these long-term goals and commitments that we've all made and really starting to show that we're making progress and talking about the progress and frankly, some of the challenges that we have to get there. So, you know, looking back on the last year, there's certainly lots of things that we can talk about, whether it be, you know, some of the recent product introductions we've had that are really starting to show EV's availability for everybody. We talk about access and the fact that this can't just be a solution for the elite. It needs to be vehicles that work for, you know, many families have one vehicle in their household and they need to use that for, and oftentimes for their livelihood. And so it needs to be things like pickup trucks and family-sized SUVs that can really allow them to live their lives in this EV future. Infrastructure is really starting to occur as well to make that available for everybody across the country, across other countries as well. Probably from our standpoint, as we make this transition to an all-EV future, and we've said all along we can't do it by ourselves, we need partners, whether it be in the public or the private sector. But it's really focusing today on what we can do on our own. And so maybe the biggest one to talk about is our renewable energy goal, which I know we all have great commitments and progress around that. We're really proud that in the US, we've achieved all of the agreements we need to be 100% renewable by 2025. You know, we're twice any other automaker in purchases and agreements. And it really, while maybe small in our total carbon footprint, it really is a huge impact of what we can do to accelerate this transition and make it more available. The only way we're going to get to zero is if we can charge all of our vehicles with green energy. And so whatever we can do to be part of that solution, I think is really important.
Well, thank you all. Let's switch topics for a second. In the U.S., I think at some level we're involved in an industrial revolution. If you think about the investments of the IRA, you think about the leveraging of the IRA, you think about the infrastructure, chips, which is obviously not our topic, but it's a pretty amazing time, and you can really see, a different future, a different type of work for people, different supply chains, et cetera. I'd be interested in, maybe, Kristen, we can start with you. When you look at all of these opportunities that have been created in the IRA, the tax credits, the grants, the loans, et cetera, is it working for you? How do the companies feel about? I mean, it's new, I get that, but it's a different way of trying to achieve environmental outcomes, which is to put a lot of money into it. Historically, we've regulated, let's set a standard, let's enforce the standards. So we still need our standards, but the investment of money. So I'd be curious to hear how it's going for folks.
Yeah, for sure. So for us, we're really excited with what it enables. The faster we can accelerate this all EV future, the better for everybody. And so, I mean, maybe some of the points to highlight, the tax credits or for the purchase of an EV is certainly a huge accelerator and incentive for customers. We expect all of our vehicles that meet the MSRP for 23 to be qualified for the tax credits, so that's fantastic.
That's
news
huge.
For the customers. Yes.
Yeah, huge.
The help and the assistance with incentives to transition our facilities. We talked about the great agreement that we have with our union partners and being able to take our existing ICE facilities and transition those to producing electric vehicles, I think is super important. It enables us to continue to be, as we would say, a good neighbor, in the communities where we have facilities and are making this transition a reality for everyone. And then the technologies, whether it be, you talked about chips, we talked about the supply chain, these continue to be challenges that we have to overcome. But I think the work that you have seen with the supply industry about really looking at sustainable and resilient materials for battery production and localizing and bringing as much of that, to North America as we can, and doing it in a very sustainable way, again, is just going to enable this transition. So all of those are supported by the IRA, and doing that together is, we talk about collaboration all the time, is really what makes the success a reality.
Lauren?
So I love this question because policy is going to make or break the next couple of years for an industry like ours in particular. And I give tremendous credit to this administration for the historic policies that we're seeing around aviation in particular, but then the broader clean energy transition that needs to happen. For us, it was really this incredible signal that the administration sent around sustainable aviation fuels. It's the first policy incentive we've seen here in the U.S. supporting that, and it was essentially a signal to the market that it's time to transition now. Let's go. And what's been really interesting about that, I mentioned United stood up this venture fund earlier this year. A lot of our business case around why that works now is rooted in the policies that we saw through the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill and others. That enabled us to see the economics for some of these technology pathways that, frankly, 18 months ago really didn't make any sense, and suddenly they had a viable future when you look at it from the perspective of a user of those products. So really tremendous. Our challenge right now that you're hearing probably from all of us is the pace of change. How quickly can we go? How fast can this policy unlock the type of investment activity that we really need to start seeing? And I will tell you in total candor, it's not happening fast enough in aviation. We're not seeing the conversion from existing assets, renewable diesel, to sustainable aviation fuels. The incentives are not high enough yet to see that behavior occur, not even to mention the net new pathways that are really promising, but they do need to move from sort of the venture, million gallon lab capacity to the 10 million gallon demonstration site to commercialization. United, in a given year, needs 4 billion gallons of fuel. I don't need 10 million, I need 4 billion. So we've got a lot of work to do, and that's just a single operator point of view. But I'm very ambitious and optimistic about what I think the future can hold. We are working very closely with the administration on some of the guidance on rolling out the Inflation Reduction Act guidance for sustainable aviation fuels. We are hopeful for an extension and possibly an increase in the value there. I think that will really spur the kind of behaviors that we're not yet seeing and get the capital in the places that we really need it right now for us to have a shot to realize the goals that we'd like to see by the end of the decade.
Morton?
So, yeah, I think actually it's a shame that the government folk left, because
We'll send them a tape.
we should have given them a round of applause as well. I mean, absolutely, this is industrial policy at its best, and it does work. I mean, money does talk. That's how it works. When we look, we already heard about the EV support and so on in the green fuel space. We have been at this trying to source these fuels for a long time. There are basically two countries that stand out. The one is China. That's where we got our first deal, where the prices look attractive, and the other country is the United States because of the IRA. We haven't announced any projects yet, but we have a lot of very exciting opportunities in the US, where again the cost looks attractive. So and it's such a win-win, because we'll get our fuels, we'll get the problem solved, and we will be creating thousands of good and well-paid jobs in the US. So I think it's absolutely a game changer, and that's what we need. So congratulations to your country.
Thank you. Yes, we're very proud of it. Kara?
I mean, I would echo everything that's been said, but I think the IRA, the hydrogen production tax credit, is going to help to bring costs down. And I think also the design of the program to bring in the suppliers and the producers from the very beginning. I mean, it's both kind of how the program was designed. I mean, the thoughtfulness of kind of how it's being implemented. And we've seen this with wind and solar, so it's kind of right.
Example, yeah.
It's a good example of how this can play out and over time. And I think we just need to think about how we mechanize this and how we go quicker. Right. Yeah. How we can bring this and how we deploy capital quicker. So what's really exciting is when we go and we think about these conversations with policymakers and regulators, the capital is now available. So that's really exciting. And then how do we think about deploying that capital really, really quickly? So things like the DOE Hydrogen Hubs program, very exciting. Now we need to get those projects and initiatives kind of up and running and executed, and the private sector plays a role in that, but so does government. And so that's really exciting to see, and we all want to be a part of that and get it running. And then there are smaller, as I mentioned before, some of the investments that we're making in different initiatives and startups that are out there that are excited. How do we scale them up and help them to be a part of it too, so that whole ecosystem grows? But I think the money that's available is incenting people to invent, right? And then you want to deploy that capital and grow that. So there's a lot. And how do we get that out? I just want to mention one thing, because you mentioned just transition before. Yeah. So if I could just expand on that, because yesterday, we had gender on the agenda for the first time, I learned, at COP, which was surprising to me.
I was surprised by that.
Yeah, because I know this has been on many people's minds for a very long time, but I guess officially on the climate agenda at COP for the first time. And I think that is so critical and important. And so we need to keep that at the forefront as we think about the just transition and think about, if we are deploying capital, how we deploy it is so critical. And so while these programs are getting structured and we're implementing tax credits, how do we also apply the lens of gender or socioeconomic deployment? Because when we think about, for example, the deployment of EVs in our communities, and I know we're all thinking about this, how do we make sure that, for example, we consider air quality and we consider things like asthma rates? And
yes,
you
my favorite topic.
I know, Carol. So, we consider in communities that are, and we consider health, and we consider, where we can deploy EVs so that we can also affect people's health and make sure that we are running fast at that issue as well.
No, I think that's hugely important. I mean, I think the, in part, the opportunity that we all have right now, and we do it in different ways, is to think broadly and then to drive specifically, right? I mean, because you can solve a lot of problems. We're all talking about carbon and decarbonization, but in those efforts, there are many other ways in which we can speak to issues that are important to communities and to workers. And I think that's just really important. I applaud all of you for keeping that in mind.
Well, Carlos mentioned systems.
Yeah.
Ali mentioned
No, Ali,
systems. Yeah, and I think that that's imperative for all of us to think systemically, right?
Yep.
When you think about, we have got to think about multiple issues at once.
Yep.
We have to think about health. We have to think about just transitions. We have to think about deployment of capital. We have to
Workforce.
think workforce, and we have to think programmatically.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so many of you have mentioned investing, you have funds and that you're investing in sort of out there technologies. Really quick, what's the favorite out there technology you've seen recently?
I'll mention two really quickly, and one is we've invested in Beta Technology, so that's an all-electric aviation solution, and we've done one test flight from an Amazon hub-to-hub. So
Oh, you did it.
Yes, that's exciting. And another is a company called Genesis, which is a female-led company which is doing biodegradable plastics from
Ooh,
waste. So
very nice.
Very exciting.
Okay,
Yeah, lots of exciting stuff going on for sure.
your favorite,
My favorite, it's a tough one.
the one you went home and told your kids
since,
about.
So
And they understood.
I actually think that some of the developments we are seeing in actually getting these carbon-based fuels that both shipping will need and certainly aviation will need, I think we are seeing some very, very exciting. We have a couple of startups we have invested in. Both of them are here in the United States. Not here, but in the United States. One of them is basically taking a completely different approach to methanol from direct air capture, a modularized approach, which actually seems to be working. And the other one is actually direct ocean capture of carbon.
Oh,
So instead of sucking the carbon out of the air, the oceans and the air is in an equilibrium. There's actually an argument to be made that if you actually draw meaningful amounts out of the air, then the oceans will start emitting CO2. So you should actually take it from the oceans. It's much cheaper. Technology is much safer. And the big challenge is really, can we make sure that the oceans actually reabsorb
because
the
they're
carbon from
great.
there?
I mean, it's a big sink. So if you take it out,
Yeah, I mean, the oceans
you
are
create
huge
more
carbon sinks,
opportunity.
right? So if you take it out of the water,
Yeah.
the water will take it out of the air. And
When you
it's
take
much-
it out of the water, where do you put it?
Well, either in the ground or into a fuel.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
that's pretty exciting, and because the technology pathway is highly certain to work, it's really around can we make the accounting work, if you will. So I could go
Interesting.
on, but I probably shouldn't.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I will absolutely echo. I think it's really exciting to see how carbon capture technology is evolving. And from our point of view, it's really around utilization. So we hear a lot with sustainable aviation fuels around constraints for feedstocks. How do we have certainty of supply for the feedstock? If we're going to put $1 billion to build this plant that enables production, but we don't have a supply chain that enables certainty of feedstock, that is a massive constraint on financing right now. What I love about power to liquid or e-fuels or some of these carbon capture to utilization pathways is that we have an abundance of carbon emissions in the atmosphere. And if we're able to use it in a way that is economic and scalable, we actually then have a closed loop system for aviation for the first time, which is really, really exciting. Another twist on that is this company that we invested in called Cemvita. I do like to bring this one up all the time because it's sort of fascinating to me from a science nerd meets business person perspective. But they literally have a microbe, like a superbug, that eats CO2 and converts it into a high-yielding lipid, which is a feedstock for SAF. So we're seeing all of
converts
these
it into what, a high-yielding
lipid, a
lipid?
fat.
Okay, I thought you said lipid.
A fat.
Interesting,
And
a
then
fat.
we can use that to actually produce SAF today. And so what's really exciting is that we're seeing both a pure technology pathway, a biotechnology pathway, and then of course there's everything in between now and that future, which is frankly not going to be here for another 2 decades or so. But we have an opportunity to really build correctly for the future that we know we're going to need and not necessarily add net new carbon into the atmosphere.
Boy, as an engineer, I want to sit up here and ask a lot more
I
questions.
know, right? I want to learn about lipids.
Yeah, me too. You know, again, I'm thinking of all the small. One of the things I love about innovation, and particularly as an engineer, is we thrive on. You know, it's not always the biggest new technology. It's those small improvements that really lead to, you know, change and substantial change over time. So I guess the most applicable for everyone would be a company that we've invested in called Wind Catching Systems, which instead of a single turbine for you know, wind generation or for power generation from wind, it takes an array of smaller turbines for an offshore wind, and you can produce about 15 times more energy in the same amount of ocean floor real estate. So really showing some great promise to be able to, you know, solve some of the challenges with offshore wind generation that we've seen, whether it be site issues or other things with access. So, but lots more. I could talk about innovation all day long.
Well, it's exciting, right? I mean, it's just, and the idea that there's so many entrepreneurs, there's so many scientists, engineers out there, you know, thinking about, and, you know, you want all of them to make it. They won't all make it, but certainly some of them will. You all, each of you have mentioned in some way how you work together, and I think that's so exciting that it's not just, you know, obviously working with the government, but working with other, you know, people in your sector, with other sectors. I think, you know, it's an all hands on deck moment. And I guess maybe as we sort of close out, sort of talk a little bit about how that work is going and who you see as your most important partners in the near term, not within your sector, but, you know, out more broadly speaking. So I would think for you, it's, you know, the charging stations probably.
It is, but honestly, it's unique partnerships and collaboration that you wouldn't traditionally expect. You know, again, I spent most of my career in product development, which is very insulary, right? Mm-hmm. And we want to come up with the new technology first, and we don't want to share it with anybody. The great thing about this space, and it really is collaboration, mm-hmm. you know, and I say it even with our competitors, we need to collaborate in this space. We can compete on products, but we have to collaborate on solutions. And those solutions cross industries. They, more so than you could ever imagine, whether it be materials that we need to use, whether it be charging infrastructure. I need charging infrastructure, and you need charging infrastructure. You probably do, even at the airports and in your own fleets. So there's so many areas that we can come together, which is the beauty of these conversations and the relationships that we build. So, you know, again, I think we'd all agree it's the key to our future.
I'll just speak about two different dimensions, Carol. One is really around representing the full value chain above and beyond so what you would traditionally think of as industry representation. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act's tax credits for the sustainable aviation fuel, they were achieved by a coalition of 85 different companies that came together that represent not just fuel producers, the incumbents, the users of the fuel ourselves, but then also some untraditional players like labor unions. I was just at the White House the other day with my colleague from the flight attendant labor union talking about how for them, it's important that they enable a transition to a low-carbon future of flight, and this is really, to them, a safety issue and also sort of a point of pride. Yes, absolutely. Yep. And so hearing sort of that cross-value chain point of view to enable the kind of transition we need is really, really critical, and I'm very proud of the role that United has played in bringing together sort of this broad coalition of voices to sort of focus on an outcome which we were able to achieve. So that's really been truly remarkable. I will also mention that, you know, I collaborate all the time with my peers across the industry, and top of mind, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it today, is collaboration with our investor community. There is a lot of dialogue these days around transparency, about KPIs. What are you reporting? How are you reporting in California and the EU? And then
we could have a whole session on reporting.
Oh my goodness! But I will tell you,
we'd be here all day.
They have been remarkably open and innovative in how they're working with us to understand what is the right transition strategy for you. And so it's really important that we recognize, like, yes, we need their money, and yes, we want them at the table, but yes, they've been really fantastic partners. And so I did want to put a plug in for that one.
I remember feeling a couple of years ago at COP, oh, it's changed, the investors are here?
Well, I would always say that the most important partner is actually the customer, because if there's demand, the rest shall follow. I mean, that's just how the world works. But it's a bit of an obvious statement, I guess, not least in an event hosted by Amazon. But I would actually say, particularly at this point in time, it's actually about the regulators. I think for the shipping industry, which is 2 to 3% of global emissions, we actually have an opportunity to change the game. So if we succeed as an industry to put enough pressure on the system and do enough lobbying across all the different member states, we can change the game. And this can move really, really fast. So I would actually say that this year in particular, it's actually my industry peers and all the many people in that regulatory.
In the regulatory?
Yes.
Oh.
Because it's a
Thank you
golden
for bringing up
opportunity.
regulations. You know,
Yeah.
a former regulator always likes hearing that there's a need for more regulations. That's a rare call. Kara, we'll give you the last word.
We're not in one industry.
That's
So-
fair.
And we are customer obsessed at Amazon. So for us, it is the customer. But the one other thing I want to bring in is, I think for us, it's the scientists.
Oh, interesting. Good.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of noise in this space. And so what I always say is that amongst the noise, we look for the signal. And the signal for us is the science. And so as long as we are following the science, we know where
Yeah.
we're going. And so I think the science community has a lot to teach us and is leading the way. And so for
That's
us,
great.
I think a really critical partner for us is the science community, and we follow the science.
I used to have a saying when I was at EPA and was challenged on a regulation, I would explain that the science made me do it. That, it was the science. This has been a great panel. Thank you all for the insights that you've shared today. And thank you. I know many of you off this stage. Thank you for what you're doing. It's really a remarkable moment in history. And I agree, Morten, it is a moment in which we can all be optimistic. So thank you all so much for today.
Thank you, Carol.
Okay,
We're about to start another session. So if folks can actually grab their seats. So we're going to start. So if you could please take your seats. So on behalf of the Smart Freight Center, the Climate Pledge, CalSTART, and the Government of Netherlands, I would like to welcome all of you here to discuss logistics decarbonization. My name is Cristiano Façanha. I'm the Director of Road Freight Electrification with the Smart Freight Center. And we're here today because logistics represents 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and these emissions are actually rising faster than the rest of the economy. Today we're bringing private and public sector stakeholders, to discuss logistics decarbonization, showcase their progress, and identify how to move forward collaboratively. So shippers, who are ultimately the drivers of demand and cargo owners, are really taking control of their Scope 3 emissions, driven by a sense of urgency that brings us all here. And it's exactly this sense of urgency that has led the Climate Pledge to gather like over 450 companies who committed to net zero by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the UNFCCC timeline. So the first step to reduce logistics emissions is actually to measure them, which is why our Global Logistics Emission Council framework is really the gold standard, helping companies to measure the logistics emissions. But from there, the idea is that we convene, we foster partnerships, we highlight front-runner success, we launch pilot projects, and then we encourage a race to the top. So that's the sequence of actions. So here today we're going to have two panels. The first panel will be moderated by Sophie Punte, the founder of Smart Freight Center. And we're going to discuss the challenges and opportunities that the private sector is facing for logistics decarbonization with a deep dive on truck electrification. So why truck electrification? If trucking was a country, it would be the fourth largest GHG emitter in the world. So we're talking about a huge potential abatement, and the electric trucks, they can reduce emissions from diesel counterparts by over 90%. So the second panel is going to talk about the interplay between industry leadership and governmental ambition, and how they're both connected and then can feed off into each other. And we'll also hear important regional perspectives, from Europe, from China, from the US. So a strong uptake of electric vehicles is really critical to put us on a path of logistics decarbonization and enable net zero by 2050. We'll also need to ensure just transition so that drivers and owner-operators and small carriers are not left behind. And if done right, electric trucks can bring both climate and health benefits while ensuring energy security a lot of investment in jobs and a lot of progress on infrastructure investments while ensuring that the frontline communities benefit first. So the good news, like here, is that there are over 300 models available for electric trucks. And then we already know that the vast majority of these electric trucks will achieve cost parity. So they will be cheaper to own and to operate well before 2030. And then there's also a lot of progress towards a unified target to ensuring that by 2040, 100% of sales of new trucks are going to be zero emissions. So 27 countries so far have signed up to the global MOU on zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles, including the 2 countries that we're going to hear from today, both the Netherlands and the UK. And then this number is raising as well. So there's going to be new countries that are going to be announced, like later today, for this global MOU. And it's important that we tackle 3 key challenges for electric trucks. One, we need to ensure sufficient supply. The second one, we need to ensure infrastructure. And the third one is that we have to unleash finance. And we're going to be listening from our panelists about each of these topics and more. But before I hand it over to Sophie Punte for our first panelist, I would like to call to the podium Pawan Mulukutla, who is the Executive Director at WRI India, to give very brief remarks about the India's perspectives on logistics decarbonization journey, through effective, equitable, and inclusive mobility solutions. So please help me to welcome Pawan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Cristiano. I think just quickly on the India perspective, road transport emissions contribute almost 13%, out of which 90% are almost, although trucks occupy less than 3% of the vehicles, they contribute almost to 1/3 of the emissions. And that's a big challenge. And another challenge that we face is almost 80% of the ownership is fragmented, right? Like 1 truck owner, 2 trucks, so it's not aggregated. So in India, what we have been doing, we have created this platform called eFast in partnership with Smart Freight Center, CalStart, and many other partners, almost 12 organizations that have come together. And we have been talking to the industry with logistics service providers, with financiers, with manufacturers, and almost 40 of them have been onboarded onto this platform right now. And this is being actually hosted by Niti Aayog, which is the think tank of Government of India. And the objective is threefold, 3 things we are trying to achieve. How would we get pilots running in the next 12 to 18 months? Because I think to see it is to believe it. I think that's a big thing that we are focusing on. And we're using the model that has been successful in the bus sector, which is the demand aggregation. Is that an opportunity to aggregate? And there was a demand aggregation signaling exercise that was done earlier this year, which we announced at the Clean Energy Ministerial. Almost close to 7,800 trucks demand was aggregated for medium duty and heavy duty from 15 companies. And our target is, can we move towards 15,000 trucks, giving a clear indication to the industry, to the manufacturers, that there is an intent to shift to electric trucks. That's one. The second is, I think the need for discovering the unit cost becomes extremely critical. While the TCO parity is important and can be seen, but I think the way the ownership is structured currently, really we need to look at how would unit economics fold out between the electric trucks and the diesel in the medium and heavy duty sector. And therefore we feel strongly that some kind of a partnership between government and private sector will really help reduce this price parity and also the challenges. And the third is, how do we really ensure that the policy measures, long-term policy measures actually are in place? I think there is one lack of clarity on what should be done at the national level and at the state level, right? Specifically in India in terms of decarbonizing the freight sector. So I think, can we look at fuel efficiency norms specifically for the medium duty and heavy duty trucks? That's one thing. The other, we are also talking about some kind of a ZEV credit mechanism as part of the fuel efficiency norms. And finally is the mandates, which would really then encourage suppliers to ensure that they are able to move towards zero emission vehicles. I think these are the three things we are really focusing on through the eFast platform, and hopefully to get many more industry partners, logistics service providers and manufacturers as part of this. And hopefully when we actually meet in next COP, we are talking about the learnings from these pilots that have been deployed along some of the corridors. And we actually have better data to really back it up with science on why zero emission trucks make sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite all panelists to come forward while I introduce them. We have Volker Ratzmann from DHL Group. He's Corporate Public Policy and Regulation Management. Then we have Andreas Kamal from the Traton Group, VP for Alternative Drivetrains. Uday Kemka from the Sun Group, an angel investor, he's the vice chairman. And then Robert Siegler from Einride is the general manager for Europe, Middle East and Africa. Very much welcome. I'd like to do the chitty chat, but we got to dive right into it. We've just heard from Chris three things. We need the supply, we need the charging infrastructure, and we need the financing and all the practicalities around operating them. So I would like to start with you, Andreas. We've seen signals of demand, more shippers saying we want it, and committing to so many trucks. Is demand enough?
Demand is definitely there. Of course, demand will grow even further when prices come down, when scale goes up, etc. Right now, we are still in a point where supply can be limited from a truck OEM's perspective, so there's actually more demand than supply, but we'll get on top of that quite quickly. We have, just as an example, just launched our first long-haul heavy-duty truck for long-distance applications, and for that, of course, it'll take a couple of months to actually get there, to have enough volume coming out. Demand, however, is strong across the board. And yes, this year has been trickier. Financing is an issue, upfront cost is an issue, etc. Subsidies are partially falling away, but still, there are enough applications for the current supply that there is definitely going to be a demand for that, including, and that's important, including in long-haul heavy-duty applications.
Yeah. So am I correct, just to confirm, there's enough demand for OEMs like yourselves to say, go, 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 we're going to manufacture the things? Yeah. Great, that's good to know. Now I want to go to Volker. You're with DHL, big logistic company, and shippers and carriers. Is demand enough? What else is needed from your perspective?
I think we see a lot of demand in the market. And you just highlighted that the limitation comes from the supply side. But I think we couldn't just look at one fragment of the whole value chain. And I think this is crystal clear and coming out of all discussions. We have to look at the whole value chain. If we don't have the infrastructure, nobody would operate with an electric truck. This is really, really an issue. We need the trucks, and we don't only need the trucks, we need the trucks, the maintenance, the operations, and behind it. So, second point. And then we need the finance sector. I think it's nice to have a platform where you aggregate the demand or just aggregate even the buying of the trucks. But if the finance sector is not willing to just finance especially the small and middle-sized companies who are running and operating the costs, they will not buy it because the upfront costs are that high, and it's not clear what's the operation time, how long the assets will be in their books, and there's no experience on this. And I think, therefore, we have to just bring together the whole value chain and create the whole environment. And this is the only thing how it could operate.
So then I want to go to Uday. I mean, you're at financing. So can you elaborate perhaps a bit on where do you think the finance is needed? And not just from the upfront cost, but also, for example, residual value, financing of the charging infrastructure, which is also a massive investment. Maybe you can shed a light.
I think the key is in what Volker was saying about the ecosystem. So I'm here today not in my capacity as vice chairman of the Sun Group, which is an emerging market business group my family owns, but as a foundation, the Kemker Foundation, that's been working with sovereign wealth funds and pension funds for 17 years on green infrastructure and for about 4 years on transportation as an area of financing. And I'd say the following few points. Firstly, it's not just the availability of finance, it's the cost of finance, particularly in developing countries. You know, a huge demand will come in those areas too. And yet the US railroads and canals were built with yield streams, bond investment, not private equity investment. And that's you need that. You need low cost, steady, infrastructure type financing. You may need in the beginning to experiment with private equity to get models validated for statistical information. So what we've discovered working in the bus sector over the last 3 years, convening again and again and again with sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, with bus OEMs, with bus operators, with city regulators, with infrastructure providers of electrons, all together, is that the way you get it from private equity returns to infrastructure returns is by de-risking all these ecosystem coordination elements in a way that would otherwise take the market 10 years. For climate change reasons, we don't have time, 10 years. So by getting them in a room to say, okay, where, in which regions, in what deployment time are you putting up the infrastructure? Okay, when are you going to manufacture the vehicles? Okay, when is the demand? You have to do that to de-risk it enough for the investors to say, oh, we get it. This makes sense. Now we can own the vehicles. Now either you can own the vehicles in leasing models, you can own the vehicles in asset deployment models that involve long-term contracts, and many different models. But this is the key by which the de-risking occurs. And finally, I'd say you can have different then asset classes of innovative structures. We know how to do this in the world of finance. So if there's a SME kind of deployment, it's very different to working on a deployment off balance sheet for Volvo. Yeah. We can structure this, we know how to do this, but we need that ecosystem piece first. So we've created something called the Collective for Clean Transport Finance. Some of you were there yesterday. It is only for this purpose. It exists for what we call the 3x5, by which we get business, finance, and industry together from the beginning. 5 stages, government sets targets, coordination, regulation, 3rd stage, pipeline development, 4th stage, subsidy where required, and 5-stage syndication to the right investors. Sorry it takes me a while.
No,
there's a lot to unpack there, but we know
okay,
how to
but
do this.
yeah. Now, I can sort of follow it. I'm not sure if a small carrier could, but maybe we can ask Robert that. So, Robert, you're with Einride, right? Maybe you can briefly explain what Einride does, because I'm not sure if everybody knows. And then, can you elaborate a bit on how would Einride, what role could a platform like yours play in the whole electrification of trucking?
Einride is a 6-year-old scale-up, and we've been operational with electric trucks for more than 4 years now. Initially, those were retrofitted diesel trucks, and now we're getting more and more support from the OEMs and actually having decent quality and uptime with that. We have thousands of vehicles on order and implementing them every day now. But this discussion feels a little bit like traveling back into time. I've spent 30 years in the transportation industry on the diesel side of things, and I left it because shippers have pushed me for decades already to come up with more sustainable solutions on road transport. And the industry just keeps pointing fingers left and right. It's the OEMs pointing at charging infrastructure, it's the shippers, the carriers pointing at the banks for financing, the banks pointing back at the OEMs in terms of bankability. I think it's time that we stop doing that. And it's time that we, stop the chicken and egg, we make an omelette, and we go ahead and build that ecosystem. That's what Einride basically does. We buy the vehicles, we finance them, we take the technology risk, take the financing risk, we build the charging infrastructure that is necessary for the specific type of transport. We build the digital infrastructure to integrate the telematics of the truck, the battery management systems, the charging infrastructure, and the driver. We bring the driver, and then we get goods from A to B, minus 95% CO2.
And is that for cars or for trucks or both?
It's exclusively for heavy-duty trucks,
Okay.
so 40 tons above, basically. The industries that are begging us to basically grow that at scale are grocery retailers, FMCG, their suppliers, but also some large industrial shippers that are serious about their targets. And is seeing that there is all these other things coming with it. First of all, being digital, it is a lot more reliable, right? I still remember the times when we were basically handing freight papers to the driver and then hoping that he would call us back 2 days later. That's not how you work when you digitally integrate the vehicle and the driver and the charging infrastructure, and that's the only way that you can run electric, because you cannot run it like you run a diesel truck. So when you go at this technology level, then your liability goes up to 95.5, 95.7 on time and full. Your cost is comparable to diesel today and will be less in the future. We see that already today, because on the kilometer electricity, on the mile electricity is already cheaper than diesel. Hardware cost is going to come down, infrastructure is going to be built. And at the moment, we're taking on these investments, we're taking on these additional risks, but we do that for our shippers and provide them a turnkey solution that gets them from A to B. And that's really what it's about. We need to, start rethinking some of our business models as well.
And when you mean shippers, you mean LSPs as well, right? The logistics service providers are part of that, or is it the shippers? Are you working in parallel?
It's really the shippers. The companies we work for are PepsiCo, are Mars, are Lidl, Schwarz Group, are Rewe, and so on. They are really looking for these solutions.
Okay.
The LSPs at the moment have the difficulty that they're mostly working with subcontractors. When I was at DHL, I had 10,000 different subcontractors every day. And how am I going to entice all these subcontractors to take that financial risk, to take that charging risk, to take that range risk, to understand the technology that they don't? They're small mom and pop companies, and companies like DHL and others aggregate that supply and bring it to demand. It's very difficult. You need to change your business model and actually become more involved with what's going on.
I'm going to pass back to Volker. So how is this affecting your business model at DHL? I'm curious now.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right, because this needs a lot of engagement with your subcontractors, and you need to help them not only to understand but also taking risk in that. We are trying to operate with those cars by ourselves, so we buy them. Yeah, so we are operating with heavy-duty electrified trucks, just getting the experience. What do we have to build up, for example, in infrastructure in our own sites? And this is not easy. If you just go to an energy supplier and ask for 40 megawatt connection, they say, well, yeah, come back in 5 years. So we really have a problem to get this huge amount of renewable energy, because there is no, we can't use the gray energy for charging these trucks. So, but we try to just help our subcontractors, having very close links with them, taking risk, and just stimulate them to just invest in this. But we also, and this is because I said we need the finance sector to help them to get the upfront cost financed. We need to just push them into that finance sector and collaborate with the bank to give them the financial background to ramp up their and to adopt these new technologies. But there is another, just one point.
Yeah.
I think pilots are great, and I love those examples. We do pilots as well, yeah? And I think we have to discuss how we could set up corridors just to expand these pilots and show how to run. But when it comes to scale, and scaling up in industrial measures, the infrastructure will become much more difficult to get it organized, that at least thousands of trucks on the German motorways are going to be charged in the right times. This is really a problem. So it's not. You're right. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem, and we have to get started. But it needs to be proper discussed and organized. Otherwise, we will get bad examples, which will disadvantage and discourage people to go that way.
Yeah. I want to go back to Andreas, because what I'm seeing is that the different way of thinking is treat all trucks as one big fleet instead of all subcontractors. You're trying to solve an ecosystem challenge. Yeah? Andreas, I want to go back to you. When you look at those carriers that ultimately need to buy the electric trucks, they will look at not from what truck I need to buy, they look at what do I need to do with the truck, you know, rather than the models. Are you, as an OEM, attuned to the needs of those carriers when they need to electrify, what they need to use it for? Is it round trips, is it long distance, etc.? Can you explain that a bit?
Yes, and I think that's an important point.
And then also, if you make a final point, because I know we're going to have to hand over then. Yes. Yeah.
No, and to be fair, that's a fair point, because even in the old world of diesel, basically we are selling every truck once.
Yeah.
They are quite specifically tuned to the customer requirements in the end. This is even more important nowadays, including right sizing of the battery, which quite often does not work. It works better in a scenario where you have a lot of charging infrastructure, so I'll come back to that in a second. Generally speaking, we are in close cooperations with our customers on this to see, for example, how they can shift their use cases. Because in some cases, that's actually just a minor adjustment. Maybe part of the fleet remains being diesel for the first couple of years, and then some other parts can be used in a more intensively regular fashion than today, which is important because intensive regular usage, this is exactly the right way to use an electric truck to get all that energy cost benefit that you've been mentioning out of that. But for all of this, we need the infrastructure. Okay. And so I'm fully in agreement with you there. You've been pushing that the OEMs are always saying like, oh, the charging infrastructure, we need to get that right. We do say that quite a lot. We also invest our own money, to be fair, in this. Milans would be a prime example for this, a fast charging cooperation together with our competitors to get this on the road, especially in long distance. Because my main worry is not that this may not come, this will come. The business case is already starting to be there. It'll just get better and better over time. Diesel has no chance, even without regulation long term. This is super important, especially in heavy duty. But it needs the infrastructure. So I'm worried that in a couple of years we look back at this moment and say like, wouldn't have this been more clear? Shouldn't you have been more proactive about this, given the lead time? We need to get this started.
And Andreas, as Straton, you are co-investing with other truck manufacturers in the infrastructure, right? Can you just 2 sentences explain that?
Okay, that would be Milans, a charging joint venture for Europe that is specifically focused on megawatt charging, on long distance applications, on that 45-minute mandatory rest period you have after 4.5 hours of driving. That is basically all it takes to enable long-haul heavy duty. Once you have those charge points, you have a quite smallish, not small, but comparatively small battery, and you still retain that full energy cost advantage. And with the margin pressure you have in that segment of the market, this is a tremendous business case. So that's make or break. Once that charging infrastructure is out, lead times are significant, but once that is out, once most corridors are electrified, it just works.
Excellent, yes. Uday, I want to ask you also about whether your initiative that you're setting up, is it covering both the charging infrastructure and trucks? And secondly, are you looking at this across the world? I mean, not just at Europe and the US, but also India, China, or wherever you think to operate?
Absolutely. The CCTF now has 80 institutions. We started off with the Kemker Foundation, the World Economic Forum, and then it went to McKinsey, and the World Bank got involved, and WBCSD has now taken the leadership, and it's now 80 institutions all over the world trying to crack the ecosystem problems we've described. And I love the discussion we've had. I think it's brilliant if you can do it within the boundaries of the firm. There'll be multiple models. Some can be done within finance. So finance can own infrastructure and bus assets or truck assets. But one way or the other, we believe there's a role for lower cost capital to work with brilliant people, like all the people here, to say, listen, we've got a lower cost of capital than you do. Can we allow you to leverage that? Not only for debt. In Europe, there's a kind of focus on debt very often, but the risk equity that is yield type equity will allow technology players to not dilute their ownership, go to an IPO with undiluted ownership, but where we provide the yield equity and debt, of course, and you take these vehicles that are very innovative. So the answer is absolutely yes, multiple vehicle formats, even small 2- and 3-wheelers, light freight, heavy freight, buses. And it's universal in terms of countries.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yes. And Robert, I give you the final word because I know we have another panel and I don't want to delay that, but please.
I think we're beyond the stage of pilots, right? I mean, we're deploying thousands of vehicles at the moment, and we're doing so at competitive costs. Financing is still a topic, right? Bankability is still a little ways off. We have a lot more data than sometimes even the OEMs do about the actual operations and at the actual, health of the battery and the ability for that to keep its value, right? Because that's basically the most expensive part of the truck is the battery pack. So the longer you can keep that, the better you can manage that over time. The more residual value you will have on the vehicle. And we need to get to a point where when I was buying thousands of diesel trucks, I would go to the bank and I would show them the contract from the OEM, which basically said, okay, this is the price of the truck and this is the price at which we're going to buy it back 5 years later. And then I could go to the bank and finance the difference. And we need to get to something like this, and that needs to be a collaboration between the finance industry and the OEMs and us to basically share that data and show where we are in terms of bankability.
So I want to conclude this panel, and I mean, for me the main takeaway is it's only going to work when the whole system works, right? It's not just one component and then you go to the next, it's the whole system. And it's only going to work when players within the freight sector really work together, because it is our sector that needs electrification. So the more we can move to the pre-competitive sphere, the better. And I'm of course really proud that Smart Fleet Center is taking this on through the Fleet Electrification Coalition, and of course really happy that Cristiano has joined to lead that work on there. So yeah, I wish to thank you all for this. If you can stand up so we have a photo right away, and then I don't have to worry about a photo later, and then I hand over to the next panel. Thank you very much.
Yes, if we can move over to the second panel. My name is Christoph Wolf. I'm the CEO of the Smart Freight Center. As you by now have heard, the Smart Freight Center is the home of the Sustainable Freight Buyers Alliance as well as of the Fleet Electrification Coalition. And I'm very glad to invite my panel to the stage. Please come on. I was in the Chris sits in the middle. You sit here. What do you mean? So all panelists will introduce themselves. This is a panel on how industry and government can work together to accelerate logistics decarbonization. I would like to give the first question to Vivian Heinen, Minister for the Environment of the Netherlands. Policies are considered to create level playing fields and to enable action on the ground. And there's a case for public-private collaboration. And so my question for you, and we know that Netherlands has been very active in especially the whole area of transport decarbonization, of road freight decarbonization. We'll hear from you. So which policies and regulations work best to accelerate the deployment of zero-emission trucks?
Well, I think that the revision of CO2 standards for medium and heavy-duty vehicles is an important cornerstone of European policy to decarbonize the transport sector. And right from the start, I focused on a very ambitious plan. Together with Belgium, Denmark, and Luxembourg, we lobbied for a strong proposal coming from the European Commission. And also in preparation of the government position, I've spoken with a lot of Dutch industry leaders and sectoral organizations to consult them on their position regarding the revision of CO2 standards. And their response was very clear. They were ready to decarbonize road transport and supported our view, but they asked governmental support, financially and in infrastructure barriers, because they have to be overcome as well. So many truck manufacturers have already set goals for production of at least 50% zero-emission vehicles by 2030, and that shows that the reality of zero-emission freight and the confidence also the sector has in reaching the goals. And they support ambitious standards and our efforts to set our ambition high. So I was very happy to see that many European industrial sectors, but also NGO leaders joined forces in writing letters to the European Commission pleading for ambitious CO2 standards. And of course we have our MOU, but I think we will talk about that later.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. So let us stay for a moment in Europe, yeah, in the UK. So I'm very happy to have Joanna. No, I have to pronounce the name correctly.
Don't worry, leave it.
Lingam.
Beautiful.
From the second parliamentary secretary from the UK Department of Transportation, as somebody who has been worked in the industry, especially on cargo for a long time. So I mean, we are super appreciative of the work that since has been done before COP in Glasgow and after that the ZEF-TC, etc. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what the UK is doing specifically, and what would you consider some of the ZET best practices from around the world, and what are pros and cons of different approaches?
Brilliant. Well, thank you. I mean, I think the last panel beautifully demonstrated that developing technologies for these international disaggregated markets is one of the sort of wicked public policy challenges we face. You know, the last panel was very clear. Certainty really matters. But I think one of the big challenges for us in government together is at what point we provide that certainty on technologies and at what point we are making decisions which are much better left to the market. I guess therefore, you know, we see that what we can do is funding from the fundamental research through to the demonstration. In the UK, we've just launched our zero emission road freight demonstrator, which is supporting both electric and hydrogen projects. And again, to the ecosystem point in the last panel, looking as well at the charging for both those electric and hydrogen projects within the programme. And then what we can do is regulate to provide certainty to the market. So we are celebrating the UK as we woke up this morning. Here, our zero electric vehicle mandate passed its last vote in Parliament last night. And that matters for this too. So that includes the requirement that by 2030, 70% of van sales will have to be zero emission. And that starts from January next year, ratcheting up to 2030. And we see already that the certainty that that is providing about vehicles on the road is bringing investment into charge point infrastructure in the UK. We've got £6 billion of incentives. But there's then clearly market failures that we have to address ourselves. Some of that comes to that charge points, where the market won't provide it in particular cases, where the interaction with the electricity system means that we as government need to act. I think one of the important discussions, you know, that we need to take forward together for freight is the sort of different data, the different demands of the freight sector, and what we can, the sort of information we can all share together to best understand where those failures will exist in charging infrastructure, and we may need to come together to act.
Thank you very much. We will come to the charging and the grid later. So this is actually an very important part of it. But before we're doing that, I would like to go to Hui Minggong coming in from China. I think it's broadly known that China took a strategic decision early on to go towards EV mobility in passenger, but also in freight. But actually not so much is known about the scale of this and about how it has worked. Yeah? So how has basically China government been enabling this transition, and what are, from your point of view, are there some lessons learned from that? Yeah? So that could be applied to other markets?
Oh, thanks. Truck is much more complicated than cars. So, truck is for profit making. If you cannot make profit, the user won't choose it. So that's totally different. And because of that, and because of the complicated ecosystem the panel one just mentioned, so the national government, local government, public sectors, owners, shippers, all different players should work together. So in the past years, I would like to say that first is different ministries are starting to working together. Previously, probably many of you know that the industry sector may play a fundamental role, but today, environmental ministries are playing a growing more important role as well. In China, air pollution is also a very important driver. So we know that diesel trucks are creating significant pollution and health impacts. So that's an important driver. In fact, last year, China sold like 25,000 heavy-duty electric trucks. The main driver for that is because of the demand from the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. Because the steel company required the coal power plant to use the electric trucks to carry their coal, carry their steel, especially during the high pollution days. So that's one. Second is, once you go to the local cities, the city has the traffic-related control policy. If those trucks could be zero emissions, they could operate without much restriction. But for diesel trucks, unfortunately, you cannot operate 24 hours, maybe only 8 hours per day. So there's a component of different policies and also including financial incentives, which is also very important. I think it's still the early stage. And also we talked about infrastructure. When we're talking about NEV or electric vehicle goals, most of them are talking about electric cars. And when we're talking about charging infrastructure, they're also more about the electric car charging services. But today we have to think about whether we could develop a dedicated truck charging facilities. That's the plan we need to work together.
Excellent. Chris, you've been yesterday on a panel already on transport finance, yeah? So, and finance obviously plays an important role. As Joanna was saying, policy is a great certainty for investors. Now, my question for you is, Amazon is a global company, so you're seeing how policies develop in different jurisdictions, in different continents, in Europe, in the US, in Asia. So what is the role of policy in those different jurisdictions for you in deployment? How can we align policies and industry initiatives? And how do you think, would you argue for a more harmonized framework around the globe? Your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think when you talk about the role of policy, I think you said it best when it's providing that certainty in the market of where we're going, right? And I'm really encouraged by what's happening, particularly with the CO2 standards in Europe, the passage in the UK that just happened, what we're seeing in the United States with the low carbon fuel standards across various states and the clean trucks and clean fleet rules that are rolling out now as well. Those provide a roadmap for not only the OEMs, but for the fleet operators to say, okay, we're going beyond just making our own commitments now. We're seeing how there is a need for the entire industry to transition on a similar timeline. And I think that's very essential. I think where we need to go further now is, first we at Amazon we recognize our size and scale. And we like to say that success and scale bring broad responsibility. And we want to lead on deploying these zero-emission vehicles into our fleet. But we operate a very vast, complex network that touches really every part of the global supply chain. And we recognize that us going it alone only gets us so far. And there's this very, very long tail of small owner-operators who are operating small fleets throughout the world. And we cannot succeed without them succeeding. And We've talked about this. We talked about it yesterday. There's the working capital there is just not where it needs to be for these small owners to accelerate their path to decarbonize. And so we have to lead the way to allow the vehicles to be deployed early, and then figure out with our policy partners, with the finance partners, there's a whole ecosystem of things that have to happen in harmony very quickly in order to allow small businesses to then adopt this technology that is, to the points that have been made today, maturing very quickly. The costs are coming down very rapidly. The total cost of ownership is becoming on par or better in some cases than diesel. We just got to figure out how to get it deployed really rapidly. So I love the notion that we could take some of the learnings of what's going on and going well on policy fronts in different areas of the world, and then scale that more broadly across multiple regions, multiple countries.
Yeah, if I can have a follow-on question. I think, you use some words like policy partners and acting in harmony. So my feeling is often that obviously governments, before moving on new policy, will want to take the temperature of the market, if what the market thinks about that, and obviously private sector companies are key. So kind of a gentle approval or kind of a nod to say this actually would really make sense for us, because level playing field and certainty. So and there's obviously industry that hesitate a little bit with that. Yeah. So how would you see this interaction between the private sector and the public sector to really move forward for the decarbonization of the sector?
Well, I think first it's critical that we get the policy right in a way that enables business to come along and doesn't hinder business growth and development. And I think when we do have those good partnerships early and we figure out the right frameworks, then it's essential that we go as fast as we possibly can. I think a great example is low carbon fuel standards that California and the US really spearheaded, but now we're seeing that be adopted in other regions, other states. Other countries are developing very similar policies. I think those are the kind of things that industry can get behind because it is very incentive focused as well. Like I said, it's a matter of having the early dialogue, understanding the pain points, and adopting the policies that recognize that we have to adopt quickly, but we have to do it in a way that enables the industry to come along.
Thank you. Vivian, I'm sure you have some thoughts about the partnership of governments and industry. And given that the Dutch government is active around the globe in terms of the one of the key supporter of the global MOU, etc. So I think you probably also have looked at different policies around the world in order to make that to make that happen and to learn from this. So what would be your reflection about harmonizing policy frameworks?
Yes, well, I think it's absolutely crucial that you do it together with the industry. And that is the reason why when we first took the initiative to go talk to the Commission to set high standards, we first spoke to the sector themselves to see what would be reachable, feasible goals. And we see that there is a big interest of the sector themselves to also really innovate and make sure that they make steps. So that is very important. And I think with our global MOU, where we also take a crucial lead, I think, it calls for 100% new zero emission truck sales by 2040 and a midterm goal of 30% in 2030. And I'm really proud also to say that countries that we maybe didn't expect it from directly also have supported this MOU. Last year at the COP, the United States signed the global MOU, so that is very important for a country like the Netherlands. I always say we're quite ambitious, but we're also very small. And if the thing we can do is try to initiate and accelerate, but the impact, of course, of the global MOU when it's adopted by the United States is way bigger than when it's adopted just on a national Dutch level.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. Joanna, the UK has always been very strong in financial markets, yeah? And if we compare basically the amount of zero-emission trucks that would need to be on the road by 2030, if you add up all the commitments, yeah, so, and what's being asked by regulations, SBTI commitments, global MOU, if you compare this, the 2030 numbers with what's actually already on the ground, the gap is substantial, yeah, and a lot of that needs to be, and bringing in private capital into the sector is key. So what is, in your mind, is kind of some of the bottlenecks? Yeah, why is it, what can be done in order to accelerate the inflow of private capital?
Great question. And going back to the previous discussion about, what do we think about when developing policy, definitely making sure that, investors will believe us and follow us is critical because, if the private capital is not going to come, we're sort of always going to be fighting uphill. I mean, I think here we are, it is the next stage. Certainly in the UK, we've made our, taken our action to regulate on consumer vehicles, on vans. As I said, we've set out in policy terms what we're going to do at the heavier end of the spectrum. But we now need to do, that next stage of work to provide the regulatory certainty to make, to reduce the risk, to reduce the cost of capital. And I think that is our fundamental responsibility. I guess my other reflection is, we probably in the UK, one of the, as a consequence of Brexit and also COVID, we know our logistics and freight sectors in government a lot better than we did 6 or 7 years ago, because just in time, freight, is so clear to everybody in the UK how much we rely on it, and we need to build on those partnerships now for the common challenges we face for decarbonisation.
Yeah, thank you for that. So you mentioned the grid topic, yeah, as a key bottleneck, yeah. So let us maybe dwell a little bit on that, yeah. So what is the, I mean, as we know, if in the future we will have thousands of trucks on corridors that may charge in similar times of the day, and the grid may not be equipped for that at this point. So how do you make sure in the UK that you bring together, the basic demand side, but that then also the OEMs, the charge point operators, and the grid in order to synchronize, yeah, so synchronize a ramp up for that.
So I think some of it applies generally. So we've just launched in the UK a new grid connection strategy overall about how we need to strengthen our grid and transmission network, and also to some of the system challenges on the first panel, speed up connections for the level of sort of new infrastructure we need connecting into the grid. It is then, as you say, understanding and working together where the demand is going to be, where the pinch points, if the market will just respond to that, or where it won't. So, particularly for domestic vehicles at the moment, we're about to set up a new rapid charging fund to take out the cost at motorway service areas if it is not viable to do that on a standalone basis. But again, the more certainty we provide, the market will be better able to follow.
Excellent. Hui Ming, so China has actually deployed quite a number of zero-emission trucks already, yeah? So I heard a little bit from you. You mentioned steel plants, chemical plants, some of the heavy industry plants. So knowing that many of those fleets operate like in closed loops in vicinity of those plants, yeah? Is it correct to assume that you focus on those kind of use cases first when ramping up, and then eventually will basically build those corridors where you have fleets that may be serving different customers, etc. So how is China ramping up its electrical infrastructure, yeah, to accommodate those growing volumes?
That's a great question. Well, truck sector is too complicated. There are so many different trucks running totally different distance and also with different loading capacities. So we have to figure out different solutions for different scenarios. And also we mentioned that the market is quite segmented. You cannot rely on the, one consumer with one truck to buy electric trucks as a starting point. We have to leverage the public sector to begins this kind of technology innovator. So that's why for these state-owned companies like the coal-power plant, like the steel manufacturer companies, like the urban cities, to use these electric trucks first. Or in another way, this year Chinese government initiated a very important pilot program. We call it Full Vehicle Electrification Pilot Program on public service vehicles. These public service vehicles could easily controlled in terms of risks, in terms of charging infrastructure supply, in terms of the financial or different policies. We need all these policies to support this segment as a starting market, then try to get the technology, transfer to other sectors. Even today, I would like to say there are still many challenges. One is which technology pathway is the best? At least in China, even for charging, we still have the high megawatt charging as well as battery swapping. And also, if we're talking about hydrogen, that's even more complicated. So it all takes time to get the market approved, get the technology improved, and also, so far we don't have one silver bullet to get all the truck sector to have a good answers yet.
Yeah. Well, I've learned over the years that China always does is big enough to do everything, yeah. So and kind of experiment, and then at some stage move in. I still want try to understand how the battery swapping exactly works economically, but that's maybe a question for another conversation. So I would like to mention the Smart Freight Center China is actually already there for 10 years, and we're very happy actually to work with stakeholders, as you mentioned, on some of those corridors. Yeah. So. And I think that's very important work. So I would like to make one closing round for this panel, yeah, and actually have everybody to, in a way, take some reflections about what you heard before, so previous panels, and what you would still actually give as a message to our audience on how we can succeed in our joint mission. Vivian, you want to go first?
Yes, I think cooperation is extremely important, and one of the other things we have to think about is also what we do with all means of transport when they are end of life cycle in our parts of the world. That was another panel I was in this morning, what to do with the export to third world countries, for example. And that's a big challenge, and we have to keep that in mind, and also when we are developing our own policies.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a very important point. Chris?
Yeah, I think this point has been made on several forums that I've been a part of, but I think there's recognition at this COP in particular that we have broad alignment on what needs to happen, and now we're in the implementation phase, and I think that's really essential. But I think what's important now is and this may seem obvious to this group here, but I'm not sure that it's obvious to everybody, which is we talk a lot about leadership. You hear all of us up here talking about how we're leading. There's a time when we need to know when we need to follow. And we need to coalesce very rapidly around the solutions that we know it's going to take to work. And so there's a role for policymakers to be in the lead, to help coalesce industry. There's a role for places like the Smart Freight Center to bring industry leaders together. And that's what I'm most excited about right now is that opportunity to really bring all this home and really drive the solutions we all want.
Excellent. Thank you. Joanna.
Thank you. Well, I guess we're a slightly self-selecting group here today, but I think the thing that's most exciting is nobody has said this can't happen. What we've identified is there are, multiple coordination issues and all sorts of different dimensions, but we can do that. We can do that together. There is nothing technological I've heard anyone saying holding us back, but it's how we coordinate between ourselves, between nations, within industry, within nations.
Number one, if we want to solve the problem, we need to get it simpler. We start the simplest challenges first, not get all the problems combined together, then you won't have the solution. Second is, we need to have the ambition and alignment. But we also need to have sustainable, continuously action, not just ambition, just the goals. Finally, welcome to visit China, and we learn from each other. Thank you.
Yes, so I really would like to thank the panel. So I think there were some clear messages about collaboration, about leadership, and I think it's really up to us. I mean, yes, we are a bit self-selected here, so I think there are folks out there that are pretty skeptical and still say, well, this is, I mean, not long ago, this was a hard-to-abate industry. I think we now say it's a ready-to-abate industry, so there's actually, and the good thing is actually it's a focus on a comparatively smaller fleet base, yeah, and it's done, the changes, transformation happens because of economics and because of rational thinking. Yes, we need to bring the small basically informal sector onto it. And I like Hui Ming's push to say, let's go for the simple things first and then grow the network. So thank you very much, and for the whole panel, for this panel, and for the whole everybody joining in today. Thank you. Yeah, so we should take a picture. So who is the picture? Who is the picture taker?
Shows